Hi students, for the doctoral program. I lied, and this is not going to be done through digital dialogue. I have literally, over the last bit, recorded 6 videos, and it stopped and said connection failure or something. So I'm now going to do this through YouTube, for crying out loud. So you should have seen the brilliance each time I've talked about this before, but I'm getting briefer and less interested in waxing lyrical. Each time it fails out and it doesn't save it. So here, I've now done whining. February 23rd, on the Friday the 22nd, it'll just be philosophy all day, all the time. But on the 23rd, Saturday, it'll be we'll have time for school law. We'll have some hours together. And I have mentioned, and it shows on the syllabus, that Chapter 5, I hope that I've been able to convince you that it's not just out of someone's navel law, some subjective decision, but when it comes to church and state, it's hard to not believe that it isn't a little bit subjective or guided by things that are extra legal. And so we're going to workshop Chapter 5 together. Just sort of skim 5, if you will, but don't do any briefs and don't read as deeply as you'd like to. Perhaps read some of the things around the cases, perhaps, and get prepared. But on Chapter 5, I'm going to assign 2 of us at a time to take 1 to 2 cases, and we'll give you time in class to read them and do a brief at them together. And then we'll have you present on them when we come back together. And we'll all learn from your brief. We'll discuss it together. We'll try to pay specific attention, particular attention, to the key cases and to what tests, how you decide something is an establishment of religion or not. And so we'll spend time on that. I don't care if we have to throw things off of the curriculum at the other end, as long as we, as who we are, get the chance to talk about how we feel about church and state issues and how it hits us in our practice as school leaders. And so be prepared for that. And that'll help you not have to prepare too much for one weekend. So do Chapter 6 and 7. And one of the ways we're going to do 6 and 7 is I've asked you to now, this weekend, do one of your 2 Supreme Court full briefs that's graded. The grading will be relatively light in the sense, but what we want you to do is to go to the Supreme Court's website, supremecourt.org, I believe it is, but I've given you a link, and just get from one of the cases in 6 or 7, or another one if you want to, but do one that you have to read anyway. Don't just read what's in the book. Read the whole case. Read the dissenting opinions too. Read the concurring opinions. They'll follow afterwards. And then you see the whole argument all the way through. And you might be persuaded by the dissenting opinions in a large measure. That's why they write them, to try to make a change in history. So you'll have facts, your citation of course, then the facts, then the issue, then the ruling or holding, then the analysis of the majority opinion. Then just a brief little bit about any concurring opinion. And then, or opinions, and then a brief little bit about a dissenting opinion. If there's another dissenting opinion, another dissenting opinion is brief. Just 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 lines, whatever you think. Justice Scalia, Justice Ginsburg, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, said that didn't believe that the test should appropriately be X, Y, and Z. This would open up the floodgates of all kinds of litigation, yada, 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 yada. And stop. And then at the bottom is your conclusion, which is your voice. And you get a chance to talk about it if you want to, whether you're persuaded by the dissents or the concurring opinions. So that's where you'll be there. And now that I'm doing this a different way, and I don't think I'll be unable to save this, I want to just talk to you a little bit to prepare us for church and state. Chapter 5, we're going to read a case called the Good News Club case. And in Good News Club case, the text doesn't really prepare you for the real issue. So I need to talk you through a couple of things. Religion and establishment of religion gets conflated with free speech issues. They call it hybridized rights. My right, your duty to not let me as a state speaker, like a teacher, establish religion must be tempered by my rights as a citizen to speak. Well, there's been one case where a court alluded to a hybridization that provides more protection and limits concern about establishment, more protection for speech issues, but it hasn't really been used much. But they come together, speech issues and religious issues, and the courts have done their best to kind of make it a little complicated. In the Good News Club case, it's important that you understand a case that happened before, which is the Lamb's Chapel case. We'll read together a Mergen's case. The Mergen's case was a statute that said if a school club wants to exist, that school club gets to exist during or just after school hours with students and no adults in charge. Doesn't matter whether they're religious or not. And it's called the Equal Access Act. And the Mergen's case interpreted that act. But with adults in charge, there's a case called Lamb's Chapel, where people rent the buildings and wanted to rent the buildings. And in Lamb's Chapel, a religious group wanted to rent the building in the evening to show a video. But the school said, I'm sorry, we're a limited forum of speech. We will only allow, we can't allow religious groups. So let's stop for a second. There are three basic fora for speech. An open forum, where you must tolerate robust and relatively challenging speech. That includes courthouse steps. That includes Main Street in a parade. That includes the park or whatnot. And then you can limit speech by reasonable time, manner, or place, but not by the speaker, not by the message. You can say, we're not going to let you fire off a cannon, certainly not after midnight or whatever. But then there's a limited open forum where there's public buildings and public things that are open for speech in a sense, but there are limitations. They have to be reasonable. The public schools are limited because we don't want people coming in when we're trying to teach the schools, and other limitations like that. Then there are closed fora like BYU, and BYU is a closed forum. Speech happens the way they set it up, and only the people they invite get the chance to speak. And so on a limited open forum, you can limit your open forum any way you wish as long as it's reasonable. So in the Lamb's Chapel case, they were told, you know what, you can't because our limitation of open forum says no religious groups. The United States Supreme Court made it more complicated, but maybe it was a good correction, and they said it's not a reasonable limitation on the open forum to just say we're going to bar any religious groups. And that might have been a good correction. It made life more complicated, but it might have been a good correction. In Lamb's Chapel, they said, well, when this religious group comes in and is doing something that's not an exercise of religion, that's not a religious exercise, I should say, that in this case they're just showing a video about parenting from a Christian perspective, that's teaching values, much like the Boy Scouts and other religious groups and other groups, including psychological groups or community groups, would do. You can't say no. They've got to come in, as long as they're teaching values. Then comes the Good News Club case we'll read together. And some adults with the Good News Club were using little kids, and they were renting the building right after school's out. They'd almost actually run the teacher out. And then they would have prayer and hymns and altar calls and teach their duty to profess Jesus and ask people if they wanted to come down and confess Jesus, those sorts of things as I understand it. This sounds and looks like religious exercise to me. However, Justice Thomas said, he's disappointed, and this is only a dicta, this isn't a holding. He said, I'm disappointed. He said a message this way. You don't get it all in your book. Too bad the parties stipulated or agreed in advance that it is a reasonable limitation on their open forum to say no religious exercise. We already know from Lamb's Chapel you can't say no religious groups. As long as religious groups come in and they're just teaching values, they can come in. And he said, I'm sorry that you did that stipulation in a sense, because I think he thinks you should never be able to have a reasonable limitation on your open forum, be no religious exercises in public buildings. And so, but that hasn't obtained yet. That's the next thing that might occur. But what he did, in my opinion, was rest the decision in Lamb's Chapel and say, well, when they came and did these altar calls and did this stuff in the Good News Club case, that was just teaching values. That wasn't a religious exercise. And so they didn't establish religion, and you can't keep them out. You can't infringe on their ability to rent the building. And that's the Lamb's Chapel case, applied to the Good News Club case, because Justice Thomas can't tell the difference between teaching values and a free exercise in that case, perhaps. And that's troubling. If there's no way to know we're having trouble enough knowing what religion is, but now we're having trouble knowing what an exercise religion is versus values, and we have to think about this. There's no right answer. I have things I'm concerned about, but I want you to understand what we talk about and think about so that you can't be flam-floozled and flim-blobbled about this. Okay? So those are the key things for next time. I hope you're well prepared. Call me if you have questions. Again, I'm going to grade the graded briefs relatively easy in a sense that 10-point scale. If yours holds together and it's grammatical, you'll get 10 points. If you made any kind of errors at all, you might lose a little bit, but this is something that I want for the learning. So don't go crazy to make it perfect. Just make it good. And enjoy reading a full case. All the students that I've talked to say, oh, reading the full case helps me understand a lot more than just reading these excerpts alone. But you also don't want to read the full case of all these cases. That would take too much time. Although we do a lot longer cases at the law school sometimes than other texts. Thank you, and be safe in travel, and I will see you on Saturday. We'll enter the dark side after philosophy. You've probably seen the t-shirts, welcome to the dark side, we have cookies. Then there's another t-shirt I saw a student have that said, welcome to the dark side. Does it surprise you we lied about the cookies? So I won't have cookies for you, but we'll start the dark side of the law, and we will see you Saturday. Take care.